welcome to the Remington podcast, where we talk about all things ammunition. I'm your host, Audrey Mays, and today we're sitting down with Mr. Jimmy Lawrence, who is our ballistics engineer.
That's right.
Head of ballistics?
No, just the engineer.
Just the engineer? Gotcha. All right, so today we're doing something a little different. It's our first video podcast, and we are going to answer listener emails.
Okay, that should be interesting.
Yep. Jimmy, how long have you been with the company?
This June will make 10 years.
10 years, yeah.
I've been ballistics the whole time.
Mm-hmm. And you probably know more about plant history than most people here, I would argue.
Yeah, I've always tried to dig up little tidbits and factoids from the past. Mm-hmm. It's a very large facility, and there's a lot of little secrets around, and I've always tried to learn as much as I could about the place. So.
Yeah. I think when I first started here, you sent me an email that said some light reading, and it was like a 7-page history on the factory plant here in Lone Oak.
Yeah, there was actually a technician on the customer service side. He worked mostly on the firearm side of things. You may know Jeff Galloway. Mm-hmm. He'd put all those timelines together for the entire brand all the way back to 1816. And he had included the ammunition side of things as that came along from the UMC years through the DuPont years, Bridgeport, Connecticut, and then finally Lone Oak and new loads and all of those things.
Mm-hmm. It's definitely an interesting read, and as a new person in the industry, I was pretty thankful for it. So, well, with that, we're going to start off with a little bit of Remington history. We have Remington podcast listener Hunt. His email reads, "Hello, I'm a huge Remington follower. I would love to hear about the history of the Model 700, the Model 7, and the 870 on the podcast. Maybe even some plant history, being that I live not far away from the Ilion plant in New York."
Okay. I've never been to Ilion, mm-hmm. but that is the old original factory where Eli Follett Jr. went to town with his barrel he had forged and had a gunsmith put together the first rifle. And that was kind of the start of the brand that we always have billed ourselves as since 1816. And he went down into town in that area and really set up shop. Folks really enjoyed the rifle that he had wound up making for himself, so he started making gun barrels more often. And by the 1850s, he was making full firearms there in the Mohawk Valley on the Erie Canal, whatever that water is there. Mm-hmm. So recently, we've seen the news that facility is nearing the end of its operational life, and I think that will make it one of the longest continuously running factories on the in the entire nation. But the same thing that is driving that plant down to Georgia is how our plant here was started. So that is the growth of business, right? Mm-hmm. Our ammunition was always made in Bridgeport before 1969. And it was the same situation up there with the labor costs and the unions and the land costs and zoning and all those things. It got really tough to make ammunition there. So they moved down to Arkansas, bought 1,200-ish acres here in the farmlands, and hired every farmer in the county to come be problem solvers. And by 1973, they were making quite a bit of centerfire ammunition here. The last of the equipment came down in the late 80s, and that was rimfire. Mm-hmm. So,
yeah, that's why we call rimfire the newest addition to mm-hmm. the plant here at Lone Oak, even though it was quite a bit long ago.
Yeah, I was born in 1988, and the last loader came in 1989. So,
well, there you go. It's meant to be. You were meant to be here. Yeah, that's a good tidbit of history. And we only make ammunition here.
Right.
Right. So, well, thank you, Remington podcast listener Hunt, for that lovely email. Next, let's go with Remington podcast listener Nick, who would like to talk about the 44. I'll read his email to you. "I would really like to see Remington bring out more 44 mag deer options, perhaps an AccuTip, like the Slug and Bushmaster with the power port tip, copper solid like the Slug, and core-locked offering. The AccuTip would be more for a rifle, Ruger 44, Remington 788, Ruger 77. Mm-hmm. I think a topic like this, discussed with the R&D department, would be really cool to listen to. Keep up the great work. I enjoy listening to this stuff." Thanks, Nick.
That's a good note. That's exactly how a lot of the new products get started. You've talked with a couple of the R&D engineers in here in the past. you get enough people in the field asking for a certain use of your loads, and then you drive towards that market. One interesting thing on this specific question is we kind of already do have that. Mm-hmm. So if you go to your sporting goods store and you look on the shelf, 44 Magnum is probably going to be in the handgun section, and we currently are packing it in what's called HTP, like high terminal performance handgun. Mm-hmm. And if you look in the back of our catalog we have sitting over here, it's actually listed only in the handgun ballistics section, and it's advertised, 11 or 1,200 feet a second, whatever that number is. And it's going to have an asterisk that says that's through a vented test barrel. Mm-hmm. So the interesting thing about 44 mag is there are two different ways you can test it in accordance with SAMI. The alternative is that we have a rifle test set up for it. So the same load that we put in a box for handgun shooters, we also test through a 20-inch velocity and pressure test barrel, and it runs closer to 1,800 feet a second. And we shoot it for accuracy at 100 yards. And so if you look at our 240 soft point bullet, and then you get a 444 Marlin cartridge in the core locked offering lineup, those bullets are actually the same. They just have different groove locations.
Okay.
Now, in the past, I think we have done some things with solid copper projectiles there. And those may come back in the future, but specifically the AccuTip one, I love seeing ideas like that. That's exactly how the 450 Bushmaster came about. They saw the AccuTip slug in 20 gauge and said, hey, what if we made that a 451 centerfire projectile? The only issue with that in a 44 mag is we have to put it in a tube magazine, right? Mm. So you have your Marlin 1894 and 44 Magnum, and you load the tube with, 5 or 6 of those things. The little tip on that plastic will actually dent and pop in. Mm-hmm. It's probably not going to be a safety issue like a lot of people think about in a tube-fed magazine, but you'll start denting those plastic tips. So you'd have to have some different type of ballistic tip on that thing.
If you dented the plastic tip, would that affect the ballistics at all?
It may lower your ballistic coefficient a little bit. Usually the point of the bullet doesn't have as much of an effect as the total shape of it. But the aerodynamic stability of the whole projectile starts with the volume of that nose cone.
Gotcha.
So downrange, you might have a little bit up and down variation.
Mm-hmm. Which you don't want when you're shooting at an animal.
Consistency, right?
Right, exactly. And you said that you shoot these, when you test them, you shoot these bullets out of what would be a handgun barrel and what would be a rifle barrel?
So we have in ballistics the recipe that we test against, mm-hmm. and we keep that the same every time. And when the marketing department makes the catalog, we can use the alternate ways to test and come up with the velocity that would be from, in this instance, a real-world handgun. Mm-hmm. So a vented test barrel has a cylinder gap built into it. A lot of people wouldn't think about that. Our test barrels are tubes, very simple chamber rifling and a port for the transducer to measure pressure. But in the real world, a handgun has a cylinder gap of 5 or even 10 thousandths that leaks gas out. So instead of a solid barrel that's around 10 inches long, you would have a cylinder portion, the gap, and then your 6.5 or 7 inch rifled barrel after that. We really will only use those to establish the catalog velocities. So in this instance, 44 mag, we shoot that load in the 20-inch solid barrel, and then we advertise it with the known velocity from a handgun.
Okay.
So 38 Special is another example where we advertise a vented velocity, and we test it in a solid test barrel just because they're so much more expensive, and you wear one out, mm-hmm. you got to throw it away.
Right. Well, this is a huge topic, and we're definitely going to come back to it eventually for a full episode. But I think you did a good job touching on all those things. So, our next email comes from Remington podcast listener Steve. He says, I am hoping that you guys may do one on reloading. I'm assuming he means an episode. Shotgun holes. From old holes to new holes, maybe a few on the subject or a whole bunch of them. A lot of us here reload. I have seen tons of forums on it. People love Remington holes. The great debate on how to loaf and what to use. I assume That was supposed to be how to load. What is capable and what is not? Powders, wads, etc.
Yeah, that's a part of our industry that we've always supported, almost as long as ammunition has been around. If you look at really old advertisements and catalogs from the 1900s, they have specific instructions on how to deprime your brass and clean it with hot soapy water, just for the purpose that the end user can reload it and use it again. If you think of what we do here at this facility, on the surface it looks like you're putting parts together to make a product. The shell, the actual brass cartridge, is the hardest piece to make of the whole package. So once you have that, you're pretty well set. Same on a shotgun, especially in the old days when it was a base wad with the body tube and then the cap and all that held together. You really hate to see people just leave those on the ground to get stepped on and sun faded.
Right.
So we do offer a full list of different wads and component primers and all those things so people can reload their own ammo or even custom load. For a lot of target shooters, trap shooters and things like that will load their own holes to save money and also to hit the exact dram equivalent, shot size, things like that. So one of the things that we've always been very proud of on our STS line and even our gun club line of shot shell products is the unibody. That one-piece plastic hull is very reloadable, and we advertise that on the box as being highly reloadable. And what that means to the end user, you sit down at your bench and you have 1,000 empty fired holes and you're going to start rebuilding that ammo. The first pass, you may lose 50 of them to various little defects, mouth tears and things like that. And then as you cycle through 4 and 5 and 6 reloads, that number dwindles. Well, how long you can make that bag of shells last actually becomes kind of, maybe not important, but an interesting little arms race behind the scenes that no one really talks about. And I've seen in reload testing that we do, upwards of 20 reloads out of some of these products before the plastic is just too far gone to use again.
Well worth the one-time purchase.
Yeah.
What is so special about the unibodies that makes them so reloadable?
So a normal shot shell body has what's called a base wad, which is a disc at the bottom, and that really seals the back of the cartridge. And then the body tube, which is pretty easy to imagine, it's like a straw, fits over that. And then the cap, the metallic cap, crimps around the whole thing and holds it together. So what you have there is several places for gas to fail and get under the cap. Once you get gas out of the chamber of the cartridge and then into the metal area, that's where you get rim ruptures and you start to swell the head out, and it becomes not only harder to use, harder to extract from your gun, but can become unsafe. So the main advantage of our unibody, where the body of the tube and the base wad are all one piece with the metal there just to support that, is there's only one place for that gas to fail and go through, and that's the primer bore. So the primer's got to be there. No getting around that. But it seals very well, deprime and reprime over and over again. Every time that chamber pressure resets the base wad, it's ready to seal a new primer again.
Gotcha. So do you think the unibodies were designed in mind for reloading?
I don't know. That was a long time ago. It is, from the very first pull of the trigger, a stronger shell. And that's always going to be the most important thing: product performance and then safety.
Right.
The interior profile of that hull is specific to the wads we use, and it overall makes a better product. So. Gotcha.
And then back to reloading. I know that we specifically as a company, we don't provide a lot of reloading information. Where can they find that if the customer wants it?
Yeah, we kind of say, here's all the parts, go figure it out, right?
Right, yeah.
And it's not so much a liability thing as it is just that's the fun of building your own ammunition. But a lot of times that falls back to the propellant vendors. So if you look at the canister powder companies like Hodgdon and Alliant, they always will publish reloading manuals. And the biggest part of what makes a cartridge either safe or unsafe is what type of propellant you use and how much there is in there. So, people find out what I do or call in on the 800 line and ask questions like, hey, I need to know what type of powder and how much to put in XYZ load. And, the simple response is, we can't really share that, and it's not because it's tippy top secret, but we're changing it from one year to the next. Different lots of propellant have different charge weights. So the way those reloading manuals are written, they build in the variation from lot to lot, and they have the recommended charge levels and things to watch out for. And those guys that write those manuals are really good at setting that data up for the end user to stay safe.
And it's all based on what components you use.
Right. Yeah, so centerfire is pretty easy. You have the bullet and the shell.
Right.
But on shotgun payloads, you can adjust your shot charge, which wad you use, the column height on that cushion section, and then, of course, the primer. So changing any one of those components out can completely change your load's performance. I think the Alliant manual is the one that has probably the most in-depth information on shot shell components, and they will call them out by product type, like the RP12 wad or the STS wads that we have, the Fig 8 and the TGT, and then which primer and powder combinations play well with those. So,
gotcha. So go check out those manuals then. Awesome. Our next question comes from California. Remington podcast listener John writes, my most treasured shotguns are from the early 1900s through the 1950s. I expect I'm not alone. Plus, I live in California where hunting with lead shot is illegal, so I cannot use my treasured shotguns. Steel shot harms the barrels of my treasures, and bismuth is priced higher than I can afford. When can't or won't Remington develop a softer, non-lead, affordable shot for use in vulnerable shotguns? Maybe in Blue Peter's paper holes for upland game for 28, 20, 16, and 12 gauge, 2 3/4 inch shells.
He's hit a couple different markets there. One is a very, very niche, and the other is actually more common than you would expect. So vintage shotguns are a lot of fun to collect. Some people get into guns, buy one of everything, and some people only have what started as their grandpa's shotgun and then maybe progress from there. Even back into the 1800s where they had Damascus twist barrels, you still have to go out and have fun with those and shoot the right ammo. So what he's talking about here, a lot of people think of steel shot scoring the inside of a barrel, softer metal in the old days. That's part of it, but not all modern shotguns are chrome-lined barrels. Not all of them have harder steels than they were back then. The biggest problem is a lot of times those are going to have fixed chokes. So before we had interchangeable chokes, the end of the barrel was just swedged down with a constriction. So if you have an old Sportsman 48 with a fixed full choke barrel and you shoot a steel load through it, that payload is so much harder, it's likely going to damage your choke, bolt your barrel or something like that. So that's the biggest risk with shooting modern steel hunting ammo through one of those vintage shotguns. And it's kind of irreparable once you do that.
Right.
So to answer his question specifically, the answer I would give him would be bismuth, but I fully understand the price point conversation there. Lead has worked really well for a lot of years, and those guns were designed completely around lead payloads. So I would not really tell anyone to leave their home, but there's an option.
Those are your options.
Move to Wyoming.
Right. I mean, bismuth is, it says it right there on the box that it's good for vintage shotguns.
Yeah, it's soft. It's malleable, very similarly to lead. And then you go to the other extreme with the modern turkey loads with tungsten, where the shot is very hard. Now, they're even a load that normally would be safe in a choke that you'd go turkey hunting with. You may still strain your choke beyond what it's designed for. So now we've gotten even to a new level of technology in these payloads that we have to be mindful of how we shoot this ammo when we go hunting. So now we're just skipping back a few generations to where lead was the only option, right?
The only answer.
Yeah.
So tell me a little bit about how the fixed choke in these vintage shotguns create barrel bulge.
Well, if you look at your standard hunting shotgun, go into your safe and pull out like a Benelli or a Remington, and you pull the choke out, you'll see it'll say a lot of times for steel shot. And they're only going to put that on the IC and the mod choke, which is, medium constriction. Once you go to the full or extra full chokes or even improved mod, you're going to see a lot of them are marked for lead only.
Okay.
So what that is, if you overconstrict your payload, you can think of pushing a bag of potatoes through a tube that gets tighter all of a sudden. That material has to go somewhere. So lead deforms a little bit, but the main goal of the choke is to elongate and make the shot string more narrow.
Right.
So you get a more dense pattern, right? With the steel, it's already packed together so tight from the hit of the chamber pressure. You're running around 10,000 PSI to push it down the barrel. It doesn't really compress very well, and it makes it almost like a solid plug when it hits it at the velocities those things are going out. So what you basically will do is just push your choke open instead of the choke pushing the payload down.
Gotcha.
So there are chokes out there that can handle that and are designed to constrict harder payloads. But when you start talking about choke strain and the velocities that these things run at, you're not going to just be able to unscrew your choke and put a new one in if you do that.
Right.
So
basically something's got to give. Gotcha. Hopefully not your shotgun barrel. Thanks, John. Our next email, comes from Remington podcast listener Jarrett. I'm also led to believe that Jarrett is an Aggie, so gig him. He says, I've been extremely interested within the past few years. I'm getting a super fast varmint gun that shoots flat and accurate. My dad always talked about having a 220 Swift in his younger days, so I picked up a search for one. In my search, I came across other fast loads such as 22 Creedmoor, 22 250, 22 250 Ackley, and the 204 Ruger. However, nothing even touches the nostalgia of a 220 Swift.
That's actually really similar to the shotgun question. You've got this issue between technology and innovation and nostalgia.
Right.
And how do you put a number on nostalgia? So the 220 Swift is still a great cartridge and has been for a long time. It's probably coming close to 100 years old now. I think it was probably mid-30s. We load that, in the high 3,000s in terms of muzzle velocity, but a hand loader can stretch its legs a little bit more than that. Is it the best one? No, we've got faster cartridges with better ballistic coefficients. He mentioned 22 Creedmoor. That's still a Wildcat, just very, very new within the last couple of years.
Right.
Same thing with the Ackley improved cartridges. Those were the hotness, 20 and 30 years ago. So you look at a 22 250 Remington versus a 220 Swift, and you try to find the advantage in one versus the other. People may talk about barrel life. Those are actually going to be really similar between the two. You have a lot of neck down, right, from your body diameter to the bore diameter, and throat erosion and all those things are not going to be that much different. So is one better? Usually it starts with what firearm you wind up with.
Right.
And so we will always be loading those niche cartridges, even if they're extremely popular within a certain following, so that people can have their own choices as to whether they want the new cartridge with the better technology of what we've developed, or something that's 100 years old and has a venerable legacy of having shot, 10,000 gophers, whatever that target is. But yeah, you've got almost 100 years of product development between the one and the other,
Right.
to shoot the same prairie dog. And I've always found that very fascinating.
Yeah, me too. I am known to hunt a prairie dog. And I use just regular 22. So, it's all personal preference.
Yeah, 223 Remington's very versatile and very popular for varmint hunting. At some point, you can just take your 30-06 out there and do the same thing. But the idea that they wanted to make a specific cartridge just for varmint hunting has always also been funny to me, because we're in Arkansas. I don't have that as a sport, right?
Right.
We can go squirrel hunting, but we aren't in Kansas where that is extremely popular, or Utah. But we're definitely here to support it.
Yeah, definitely. And varmint hunting is actually on the rise right now. We've gotten a lot of requests from customers either at trade shows or in my personal life talking about varmint loads, and people just want them to be fast.
Yeah, the first time I thought about what that ammunition is supposed to do, we were testing some 17 Remington Fireball.
Right.
And I was looking at the numbers and the specs on the sheet, and it's running around 4,000 feet a second with a 17 caliber bullet. So basically a pellet rifle on a lot of steroids, right?
Right.
And I started looking at the accuracy results we were getting. It was shooting 0.6 inches at 100 yards. And I got to thinking how much that would make that sport more enjoyable. Because, you see your target out there 150 yards, and now not only can you put your shot on the head of a squirrel, if you're good enough,
Right.
It will absolutely vaporize it when it gets there.
And that's what people want.
It's on my to-do list.
Right.
Yeah. Make some pink mist.
And varmint hunting also has very much expanded from small rodents like prairie dogs and squirrels. Now people include feral hogs, coyotes.
Yeah, jackrabbits.
Yeah, jackrabbits, sure.
Yeah, so the predator hunting is another market, and those have kind of combined. And I think just looking at it from the outside, I think I've hunted hogs once.
I think.
Well, there's an interesting thing happened in the last 20 years where the modern sporting rifle, AR pattern rifles got really popular. People started actually training and buying more tactical type gear for home defense and property defense and, working on a ranch. And so you get your setup, you get your night vision goggles, and you get your ammunition picked out. But what do? You can't just sit and wait on the STHF that we'll prepare for.
Right.
You can go shoot coyotes and hogs and all those things, and it becomes a way to use that gear. But then it also ties back into the varminting, where you have hyper accurate, high velocity rifles and ammunition. So I would like to try some of those things one of these days as well.
Definitely. And I mean, like you said, you can't beat the nostalgic stuff. You, going back to the shotgun question, are the proud owner of many vintage shotguns.
Yeah, I actually shoot sporting clays with a side-by-side with hammers.
I've seen it.
Because it's more fun. I don't shoot better than anyone, and not even as good as myself with an 1100, but I do have more fun with it. And kind of an example of exactly that conversation on nostalgia versus what's new or better. You look at a cartridge reload like the 3040 Craig. Those guns are out there. It was a military surplus rifle that never saw a lot of action, so they're all in good condition. You go to a gun show and you can still find a Craig Jorgensen made in the 1890s. You go to a store and pick up a box of Remington core locked and go hunt a deer with a 3040 that's 120, 130 years old. That's a lot of nostalgia that we support. And it's the same conversation with a 3030 or any of the other lever gun chamberings. We've been loading that same ammo for a long time.
Right. And it's nice to be a part of that also. We are Remington, so
Yep.
nostalgia is kind of the name of the game for us.
Yeah, and I've always enjoyed kind of taking the devil's advocate on protecting the catalog of offerings, because a lot of people would look at, my recipe book has about 1,400 different item numbers in it. Let's thin that down some.
Right.
Someone might ask, who's buying 41 Rim Mag? Well, there's a guy out there that has that gun, really loves it, and will swear up and down it's better than a 44. And every cartridge has its following. And so long as we keep selling them, we'll keep loading them.
I love that. Stick to our heritage. Well, there you have it, guys. Remington is on the rise. You can stream this anywhere. You can stream podcasts or on YouTube now. Thank you for tuning in to our first video podcast. And thank you, Jimmy Lawrence.
Thanks for having me.
I'm sure we'll have you back. You can be one of these guys on our listener question episodes if you want to reach out and email us at podcast@remington.com. That's podcast@remington.com. Thanks for listening.